Hey guys, tonight we're stepping back in time to the bustling, sun-drenched streets of ancient Rome, a world where marble temples rise against a clear blue sky, where merchants haggle in crowded forums, and where the scent of baked bread mingles with the sweet perfume of fresh flowers. But tonight our focus isn't on the grand temples of Jupiter or the mighty legions marching across the empire. No, tonight we're exploring something a little more magical. Because here in ancient Rome, luck isn't just a matter of chance. It's something you can wear, something you can carry, something you can cling to when the world seems uncertain. We're diving into the world of Roman magical amulets, tiny charms and trinkets that Romans believed could protect them, heal them, or even bring them love. And trust me, the Romans had a charm for just about everything. But before we start, take a moment to get comfortable. Dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum. And if you enjoy soothing history stories that help you relax, please take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And as always, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is. I love hearing from you. Now let's step into the misty magical world of Roman amulets together. Imagine yourself walking along a crowded Roman street, the sun bright overhead, the warm breeze carrying the scent of roasted olives and fresh herbs. Around you, merchants call out their stalls bursting with colorful fabrics, fine pottery, and glinting jewelry. But among the glittering trinkets and polished gems, you notice something else, tiny, strange-looking charms, each one hanging from thin leather cords or polished metal chains. Some are shaped like tiny fists, others like twisting snakes, or strange twisted symbols that seem almost alive. The merchant, a wrinkled old woman with a knowing smile, waves you over, her voice low but clear. "Come closer, traveler," she whispers, her eyes sharp. "Looking for a bit of luck, protection from the evil eye. A charm for love, perhaps." These are not just trinkets. They are amulets, charms of power that can protect you, guide you, bring you fortune, if you know which one to choose. Amulets were a part of daily life in ancient Rome, a quiet, constant presence in a world filled with uncertainty. A fisherman might wear a small carved fish on a cord around his neck, hoping it would bring him a good catch. A mother might tie a tiny silver crescent around her child's wrist, believing it would protect the child from sickness or evil spirits. Even powerful senators, draped in fine togas and surrounded by servants, might keep a tiny charm hidden beneath their robes, a simple pebble carved with a secret symbol, a whispered prayer against misfortune. But why were these little charms so important? To understand, you have to remember that ancient Rome was a world where fate was a constant presence, an invisible force that could lift you to glory or cast you into ruin without warning. Plagues swept through the crowded streets, fires raged through wooden tenements, and wars rumbled on distant borders. Life was unpredictable and the gods were fickle, and so the Romans turned to magic, but not the grand thundering magic of lightning bolts and divine miracles. No, theirs was a quieter, humbler magic, a magic you could hold in your hand, wear it around your neck, or keep tucked beneath your pillow. Some of these charms were simple, tiny stones, worn smooth by the sea, tied to a leather cord, and worn around the neck. Others were more elaborate, carefully carved from precious stones, inscribed with strange symbols or words in a language known only to a few. Some were made of metal, bronze, silver, even gold, shaped into the form of animals' hands or tiny gods. And these amulets were not just for the superstitious. Even the most educated Roman philosophers and scholars who spoke of reason and logic often kept a charm close by, a quiet insurance against the chaos of the world. But what did these charms actually do? To a Roman, the answer was simple. They protected you. Some kept away sickness, others guarded against accidents. Some brought love, while others promised wealth. And then there were those that promised something darker power over enemies, the ability to cast curses or turn away evil. The most common of all was the Fascinum, a tiny amulet shaped like a phallus, a symbol of fertility and protection, often worn as a pendant or hung above doorways. It might seem strange to us now, but to the Romans, this symbol was a powerful guard against the evil eye, a force of envy and malice that could bring misfortune to the unwary. But the world of Roman amulets was not just about protection, it was about control. In a world where the gods were distant and fate was fickle, these little charms were a way of seizing a tiny bit of power for yourself, a whisper of security in a world that could turn dark without warning. And as you walk through that crowded Roman street, you see it everywhere. Children with tiny silver crescents around their necks. Soldiers with fierce iron charms shaped like roaring lions, even the rich merchant, his fingers heavy with rings engraved with tiny symbols of luck. You pause at the old woman's stall, your gaze drifting over the strange glittering charms, and for a moment you wonder, what would you choose a charm for luck, for love, or for courage? The old woman smiles her wrinkled face, calm and knowing, and advises, choose wisely, traveler. A charm is only as strong as your faith in it. And as you step away, the noise of the bustling street, fading into the warm, sunlit air, you begin to realize that these little charms are more than just trinkets. They are whispers of hope, tiny shields against a world that can be so large, so unpredictable. And in a place like ancient Rome, sometimes a whisper of hope is enough. The bustling Roman streets fade behind you as you wander deeper into the world of amulets. Those tiny magical charms that seem to hold the power to protect, to heal, and sometimes to harm. But where did these beliefs come from? How did the Romans become so enchanted by the idea that a simple charm could change their fate? To understand, you have to look beyond Rome itself, beyond the grand temples and marble forums, to the lands that Rome touched and conquered. For the Romans were not just warriors and engineers. They were collectors eager to gather not only gold and land, but also knowledge, ideas, and even superstitions. Their belief in magical amulets did not begin in Rome. It was a tradition borrowed and blended from the cultures they encountered: the Greeks, the Egyptians, the Etruscans, and even the distant Persians. Each of these civilizations had their own magical charms, their own symbols of protection and power. From the Greeks, the Romans inherited the idea of talismanic stones, gems carved with the images of gods or magical symbols believed to carry divine power. The Greeks had long used such stones as protective charms, especially those marked with the image of Hermes, the messenger of the gods and protector of travelers. But it was from the Egyptians that the Romans drew their greatest inspiration. The Egyptians were masters of magical charms, their lives intertwined with sacred symbols, scarabs, eyes of Horus, and the sacred Ankh. They believed that such symbols were not just art, but vessels of divine energy, capable of protecting the living and guiding the dead. The Romans, always practical, saw the power of these symbols and adopted them eagerly. They brought back amulets of the Eye of Horus, which they called the Eye of Ra, a charm believed to ward off sickness and protect against misfortune. They also adopted the scarab beetle, a symbol of rebirth and transformation, which became a popular charm for Roman soldiers. But the Romans did not just copy these foreign beliefs, they transformed them. In the crowded streets of Rome, in the bustling markets of Alexandria, and in the sunlit villas of Sicily, new charms were born, blended symbols that carried the weight of many cultures. The phallus-shaped Fascinum, a symbol of fertility and protection, became a popular charm worn around the neck or hung over doorways. It was crude, even comical, but to the Romans it was a powerful guard against the evil eye. The Etruscans, the mysterious people who had ruled Italy before Rome, rose to power, also left their mark. They were a deeply spiritual people, their tombs filled with symbols of protection, their priests skilled in the art of divination. The Romans adopted many of their charms, twisting snakes' sacred knots and strange geometric symbols, all believed to guard against misfortune. But while the Romans borrowed freely from their neighbors, they were also inventive. They created their own charms, their own symbols of power. Some were simple, tiny bronze hands, shaped in the Figa gesture, with the thumb pressed between the index and middle finger, a sign believed to ward off envy. Others were more elaborate, tiny silver amulets in the shape of roaring lions, fierce guardians that promised courage and strength. And it wasn't just the poor and the superstitious who wore these charms. Even the rich, the educated, the sophisticated Romans who debated philosophy and science in marble courtyards kept these amulets close. For all their logic and reason, they lived in a world filled with uncertainty, a world where illness could strike without warning, where war could erupt at any moment, where the will of the gods was a mystery. A wealthy Roman merchant might keep a tiny gold scarab on his desk, a reminder of the eternal cycle of life. A noblewoman might wear a delicate silver crescent around her neck, believing it would protect her from envy. Even senators, those powerful men who governed the empire, were known to carry tiny charms beneath their togas, a polished pebble inscribed with a secret prayer, a ring engraved with a magical symbol. But it was not just individuals who believed in these charms. Entire families, even entire cities, embraced the magic of amulets. The city of Pompeii, for example, was filled with images of the Fascinum, painted on walls, carved above doorways, even displayed in the marketplace. It was a city that wore its charms proudly, a city that believed in protection even as the shadow of Vesuvius loomed in the distance. And so, as you walk through the sunlit streets of Rome, you begin to see it everywhere. Tiny charms hanging from the necks of children, silver crescents glinting in the sunlight, merchants whispering quiet prayers over their trinkets before selling them to eager customers. But while the charms themselves were simple, the beliefs behind them were complex. A tangled web of ancient fears and whispered hopes of gods who listened and spirits who watched, of a world where the unseen was as real as the marble columns that rose against the sky. You pause at a bustling market stall where a young woman sells tiny amulets, some made of polished stone, others of bronze, their surfaces etched with strange symbols. She smiles, holding up a tiny silver fish, its surface glinting in the sunlight. This one is for travelers, she explains, her voice warm. Keep it close and the road will be safe. Or perhaps you'd prefer this one. She lifts a tiny bronze hand, the fingers curled in a strange, twisted gesture. For good fortune, she whispers, her gaze bright, to keep away the evil eye. You smile, thanking her, but as you turn away, you notice an old man watching from the shadows, his face lined with age, his robes tattered, but his eyes sharp. He catches your gaze and smiles a quiet, knowing smile. Careful with charms, traveler, he murmurs, his voice a faint whisper. They can bring fortune or trouble. It all depends on the faith you place in them. And as you walk away, his words linger like the scent of the sweet incense that drifts through the marketplace. For in this world of marble temples and bustling forums, the power of amulets is not just in the metal or the stone. It is in the belief they carry the quiet hope that a tiny charm can hold back the darkness. And as you make your way through the sunlit streets, you begin to understand why the Romans clung to these tiny charms, why they believed that a simple amulet could hold the power of life and death, of love and luck. Because in a world as vast and uncertain as Rome, even a whisper of magic was something worth holding on to. The warm sunlight of the bustling Roman marketplace fades behind you, and now you find yourself wandering the quiet, narrow alleys of a working-class neighborhood, a place of simple clay houses, laundry lines, swaying in the breeze and the soft murmur of neighbors chatting by doorsteps. Here, away from the grand temples and marble forums, the world of amulets is even more alive. For the poor and humble of Rome, these little charms were not just a luxury, they were a lifeline, a quiet shield against the unpredictable dangers of daily life. The wealthier Romans might adorn themselves with ornate, gem-studded amulets, but here in these narrow streets, the charms are simpler, but no less powerful. You see a young mother standing in a doorway, a tiny silver crescent hanging from a leather cord around her baby's neck. She adjusts it gently, her fingers brushing against the soft, chubby cheek of the child, her lips murmuring a quiet prayer. This is the bullae, the most common amulet given to Roman children, a simple rounded locket, sometimes made of leather, sometimes of silver or gold, depending on the family's wealth. Inside, it might hold a tiny pebble, a scrap of cloth blessed by a priest, or a few grains of salt, simple things, but filled with quiet magic. Every Roman child, regardless of their family's wealth, received a bullae at birth, a charm meant to protect them from the evil eye, a force of envy, malice, or bad luck that was believed to strike the young and the innocent. Children were seen as especially vulnerable, their souls still pure, their fates unwritten. And so their parents tied charms around their necks, whispered blessings over their cradles, and kept them close, hoping to shield them from the darkness that could strike without warning. But the bullae was just the beginning. As you wander the crowded alleyways, you see other charms, tiny bronze animals hanging from doorways, rough clay, hands carved with twisting fingers, small bundles of herbs tied with twine and tucked above the doorways. A young man selling fresh bread from a wicker basket has a tiny fish-shaped charm tied to his belt, a symbol of good fortune, a hope for a steady flow of customers. An old woman stirring a pot of soup outside her narrow doorway has a tiny silver crescent pinned to her shawl, its surface polished to a soft glow, a charm against sickness. And then there are the charms of love. You see a young couple walking hand in hand, the girl laughing softly, a tiny bronze heart-shaped charm dangling from her wrist. Her lover's hand is wrapped around a simple leather cord from which hangs a tiny seashell, smooth and polished, a gift he gave her as a promise of love. But while some amulets were meant to protect others, were meant to attract, young women would often wear charms believed to draw love, tiny images of Venus, the goddess of love, or delicate silver flowers, their petals enchanted with whispered prayers. Yet not all charms were gentle. In the darker corners of these alleyways, where the sunlight barely touches, you see charms meant for vengeance, for curses. A woman whispers to an old man, selling trinkets, her voice low and sharp. He smiles, his gnarled fingers reaching into a leather pouch, pulling out a tiny wax doll, its face twisted, its body pierced with a silver pin. These are the defixiones, the cursed charms of Rome, small lead tablets or wax figures, inscribed with the names of enemies, their twisted shapes a silent plea for revenge. Sometimes they were buried beneath doorways, other times they were thrown into wells or nailed to the walls of tombs. A desperate whisper for justice, or perhaps for suffering, but you turn away from the darkness of curses and step into the soft light of a busy square, where a young woman sells simple clay charms, tiny animal figures, little crescent moons, small iron keys. Protection for your home, she asks, her voice warm. Or perhaps luck for a journey, a charm for love. You smile, but her voice grows softer, her gaze warm but curious. It is not the charm itself, you know. It is the faith you place in it. If you believe it can protect you, then it will. This quiet faith is everywhere, even the poorest Romans. Those who live in cramped apartments or work long hours in the crowded markets cling to their tiny charms. A simple bronze fish tied to a fisherman's net, a tiny silver bell hanging above a doorway, a polished pebble carried in a cloth pouch, each one a whisper of hope, a tiny shield against a world filled with unseen dangers. And while these charms might seem simple, they are anything but. For everyone has a story, a meaning. The fish brings fortune. The crescent guards against sickness. The tiny bell keeps away evil spirits. Even the most humble of charms is a link to a deeper, older world, a world where the gods walked the earth, where spirits whispered in the shadows, where magic was as real as the warm sunlight that now falls across your face. You pause at a small fountain, the water sparkling as it dances in the sunlight, and you see it, tiny coins glittering beneath the surface, each one a whispered prayer, a tiny wish for luck, for love, for a better life. And you realize that these simple amulets are more than just charms. They are promises, promises made to the gods, to fate, to oneself. As you wander these quiet, sunlit alleys, the scent of fresh bread and warm herbs filling the air, you begin to see that the world of Roman amulets is not just a world of magic, it is a world of faith. And as the warm sunlight touches your face, you feel a quiet sense of peace, a sense that perhaps in this ancient city of marble and mist, even the smallest charm can make a difference. The warm sunlit alleys of the bustling Roman neighborhoods fade away, and now you find yourself walking along a wide, dusty road, one lined with tall, proud banners and echoing with the rhythmic, thunderous march of soldiers. Rows of armored men, their faces stern beneath polished helmets, their shields gleaming in the sunlight. Roman soldiers, warriors of the empire, marching off to distant lands, swords at their sides, and quiet fear in their hearts. But these soldiers are not just armed with iron and bronze. Beneath their armor, tied around their necks, sewn into the linings of their tunics, are tiny charms. Magical amulets they carry for luck, for courage, and for protection. For even the fiercest legionary knows that strength alone cannot guard against a stray arrow, a hidden trap, or the whispered curse of an enemy. You walk alongside them, listening to the creak of leather, the dull clatter of metal, the faint murmur of whispered prayers. A young soldier named Marcus, his face still boyish beneath his iron helmet, glances down at the tiny silver charm hanging from his neck, a tiny figure of a roaring lion. Its teeth bared its mane wild. "It's for courage," he whispers, his voice a mix of pride and quiet fear. "My mother gave it to me, said it would make me fight like a lion." His friend, a scarred veteran named Lucius, laughs a dry, rough chuckle. "A lion, I carry something better." He lifts his tunic, slightly revealing a rough leather pouch tied around his waist. An old coin stolen by Oda, priest of Mars, kept me safe through 3 battles. But as you walk among the ranks, you begin to see a strange variety of charms. Tiny bronze hands, polished stones, twisted knots of silver, even crude little figures carved from wood. Each soldier has his own charm, his own quiet shield against the darkness of the battlefield. Some carry charms for strength, tiny iron swords, miniature shields, or fierce animal figures like lions, wolves, and eagles. Others carry charms for luck, simple polished stones, silver crescents or coins, inscribed with the names of forgotten gods. But the most curious of all are the phalae, large disc-shaped charms worn on a soldier's chest, awards given for bravery, but also worn as protective amulets. A soldier might march with a polished silver disc engraved with the image of Jupiter, king of the gods, believing that the god's watchful eye would guard him. And yet these charms are not just for protection. They are a comfort, a whisper of home, a reminder of loved ones. Marcus, the young soldier, clutches his tiny silver lion, his fingers brushing against its rough, polished surface. Sometimes, when I'm afraid he whispers, his voice barely audible over the march of boots and the rustle of banners, I hold it and I remember her, my mother's voice, telling me to be brave. But while some charms are gifts from loved ones, others are darker charms meant to harm, to curse. Lucius, the scarred veteran, leans close, his voice a low, rough whisper. "Not all charms are for protection, boy. Some are for vengeance." You glance at him, his scarred face twisted in a faint, bitter smile. A friend of mine, Octavian, he carried a lead tablet scratched with the name of a man who betrayed him. Every time he killed a bigot, he whispered that name, said he was offering their souls in revenge. These are the defixiones, cursed charms carried by some soldiers, small lid tablets inscribed with names buried in the earth or thrown into rivers, their whispered curses carried to the gods of the underworld. A dark magic, a desperate plea for vengeance. But even among the soldiers, such charms are whispered of with fear. For while a lucky charm is a comfort, a cursed charm is a weight, an invisible shadow that can follow you even on the battlefield. As you walk with the legion, the road stretching out before you, the distant mountains rising like dark, jagged teeth, you see more of these charms. A young archer carries a tiny silver crescent for luck. A burly centurion has a polished green stone set into his sword hilt, a charm for strength. A grizzled scout carries a tiny bronze wolf's head, its fangs bared hanging from his belt. And then there are the standard bearers, those proud soldiers who carry the great silver-tipped banners of Rome. Beneath the fluttering banners, you see tiny amulets, hanging tiny bronze eagles, polished iron spears, even strips of red cloth tied like little ribbons. The standard itself is a charm, an image of the eagle of Rome, wings outstretched, its fierce eyes staring down at the world below. To touch the standard is to touch victory. To hold it high is to call upon the favor of the gods. But even here, among these fierce, battle-hardened men, there is a quiet, whispered faith, a belief that a tiny charm, a simple amulet, can make the difference between life and death. You march with them, feeling the warm sun on your face, the cool breeze brushing against your skin. And for a moment, you can almost feel the weight of a charm around your neck, a tiny polished stone, warm from the touch of your fingers, a quiet promise that somehow you will return home. But as the road winds through the dark, misty forest, the air grows colder, the light fainter. The soldiers' voices fall quiet, their gazes sharp. You see a young man touch his silver lion, his lips moving in a quiet prayer. Lucius, the scarred veteran, tightens his grip on his sword, his fingers brushing against his leather pouch, because out here, beyond the safe sunlit streets of Rome, the charms become more than just trinkets. They are tiny shields against the darkness, whispers of hope, in a world filled with shadows. And as the sun begins to set, casting long shadows across the narrow forest path, you begin to understand these soldiers are not just armed with swords and shields. They are armed with faith, faith in the little charms they carry, faith in the whispered prayers they cling to. And for them, even in the face of death, that faith is enough. The sound of marching feet fades behind you, the shouts of soldiers growing distant, and now you find yourself walking through the quiet, sunlit courtyards of a grand Roman villa, a place of marble columns, shaded gardens, and the soft murmur of a fountain's clear water. But here beneath the cool shade of olive trees and the warm glow of the sun, you see a different kind of magic, a quieter, more refined world of amulets. These are the charms of the Roman elite, the wealthy and powerful who surround themselves with beauty, luxury, and protection. You pass a noblewoman reclining on a cushioned couch, her fingers trailing through the soft petals of a rose. Around her neck, a delicate gold chain glints in the sunlight, and at its center hangs a polished emerald carved in the shape of a tiny serpent, a charm believed to bring health and ward off poison. Her husband, a dignified senator dressed in a flowing white toga with a rich purple stripe, stands beneath a shaded colonnade, listening to a young scribe read a letter. But beneath his grand, dignified appearance, you see it a simple iron ring on his finger, its surface etched with a tiny swirling design. As you wander the villa, you see more of these quiet charms, delicate silver amulets shaped like crescent moons hanging from the necks of young women. Tiny gold bees, symbols of industry and prosperity worn on slender bracelets. Even the garden itself seems enchanted with tiny statues of winged cupids, their playful smiles hiding a deeper purpose, charms of love, meant to ensure happiness in marriage. But while some of these charms are beautiful, others are strange. Tiny silver hands with twisted fingers worn as pendants, their fingers forming the Figa gesture, a sign meant to ward off the evil eye, a force of envy and malice that even the wealthy fear. In the cool shade of the garden, an old woman with silver hair sits beside a young girl, gently braiding the child's dark curls. Around the child's neck hangs a delicate silver crescent, the Lunula, a charm worn by young girls for protection until they marry. And then there are the charms worn by the men. Thick gold rings engraved with the image of Mars, the god of war, meant to bring courage, polished green stones set into sword hilts believed to ensure victory. Tiny golden eagles, symbols of Jupiter, carried in hidden pouches as a promise of divine favor. But the charms of the wealthy are not just for protection, they are also symbols of power of status. A wealthy merchant might wear a polished amber pendant shaped like a fierce lion, a symbol of strength and prosperity. A noblewoman might wear a delicate silver peacock, its feathers lined with tiny emeralds, an image of Juno, queen of the gods, a promise of beauty and grace. And in the grand halls of this villa, where sunlight filters through sheer curtains, you see the quiet rituals of faith. A young woman, her delicate fingers adorned with gold rings, whispers a quiet prayer over a tiny silver figure of Venus, the goddess of love, hoping for a husband who is kind, for children who are strong. In a shaded study, a philosopher, his long white robe draped around him, holds a tiny amber bead between his fingers, its surface warm and polished. A gift from a distant friend, he whispers a charm for wisdom and clear thought. Even the slaves of the villa, those who serve with bowed heads and quiet voices, cling to their own charms. Tiny pebbles wrapped in scraps of cloth, a piece of string tied around the wrist, a worn silver coin kept hidden in a sleeve. But not all charms are for protection. Some are for influence, for control. In the grand candlelit dining hall, you see it an old man, his face lined with age, but his gaze sharp, lifts a tiny silver amulet to his lips, whispering a quiet prayer before he speaks. And even the grand statues that line the marble halls are not just decoration. The tall, serene figure of Minerva, her calm gaze watching over the garden, is more than a work of art. She is a guardian, a symbol of wisdom and protection, her presence a silent promise that this villa will be a place of peace. As you wander through the shaded colonnades, past the flickering torches and the quiet murmurs of servants, you begin to see that the charms of the wealthy are not so different from those of the poor. They are whispers of hope, quiet shields against a world where fortune can change with a single word, where envy can strike without warning. But there is a difference. For the wealthy, these charms are also a display, a mark of status, of sophistication. To wear a delicate silver crescent, to carry a polished emerald serpent, is to show that you are not just protected, you are blessed, favored, touched by the divine. And yet beneath all the luxury, all the polished gold and silver, you sense the same quiet fear, the same whispered prayers, the same whispered hope, that a tiny charm, a little piece of magic, can hold back the darkness. As the warm sunlight fades and the cool evening breeze rustles the olive leaves, you pause beneath a tall marble statue of Jupiter, his fierce gaze staring down at the garden. Beneath his feet, you see it a tiny silver crescent tucked between the leaves of a potted plant. Because here, even among the wealthy, even in this world of power and luxury, the tiny charms still whisper, whispers of hope, of fear, of faith. And as you leave the villa, the warm glow of the oil lamps fading behind you, you begin to understand Roman amulets were not just trinkets. They were promises, a quiet shield against the unseen, a whisper of hope in a world that could change without warning. The grand halls of the Roman villa fade behind you, and now you find yourself wandering through the bustling heart of Rome, a world of noise, color, and life. Merchants shout their prices from crowded stalls. The scent of freshly baked bread mingles with the sharp tang of spices, and the sun casts a warm golden light over the busy marketplace. But here beneath the chaos and the chatter, you begin to notice something: tiny, strange symbols glinting in the sunlight. These are the symbolic shapes of Roman amulets, charms that aren't just beautiful or strange, but powerful. Each shape carries a meaning, a quiet promise, whispered in metal or stone. And the Romans, ever practical, have taken these ancient symbols and turned them into a language of luck, a silent code of protection. You pass a stall where a grizzled old merchant offers tiny silver charms in the shape of fists, Figa amulets. The fist is a crude, simple shape, the thumb pressed between the index and middle finger. But to the Romans, this is a powerful gesture, a symbol that wards off the evil eye, that terrible force of envy and malice believed to bring misfortune. A young woman with bright eyes leans over the stall, her fingers brushing against a tiny bronze Figa, and the merchant smiles, his voice a soft, knowing whisper. For luck, my dear, wear it, and envy will turn away. But the Figa is just the beginning. You walk further, and you see another stall, a bright, colorful table covered with tiny, polished amulets shaped like phalluses. They are crude, even comical, but they are everywhere, hanging from necklaces carved into wooden door frames, even painted on the walls of shops. To the Romans, this symbol is not just a joke. It is a powerful charm, a symbol of fertility, strength, and protection. It is called the Fascinum, and it is believed to protect against curses, to ward off evil spirits, and even to bring good fortune in battle. In a dark, shaded corner of the market, an old woman sells tiny silver snakes, their bodies twisted in elegant, swirling shapes. Snakes are ancient symbols, and to the Romans, they are a paradox, creatures of death and rebirth, guardians of the earth. A soldier might wear a snake amulet for courage, while a healer might keep a tiny silver serpent to protect against sickness. But not all symbols are so fierce. You pass a delicate stall filled with tiny crescent moons, Lunula, their silver surfaces polished to a soft glow. These are charms of protection for young girls, a quiet shield against sickness and misfortune. Even the wealthiest Roman girls wear them, a simple silver crescent nestled against their soft, delicate necks. A young mother, her child balanced on her hip, ties a tiny silver crescent around her daughter's neck, whispering a quiet prayer. Be safe, my little moon. May the darkness never touch you. But the Romans are not just a people of quiet faith. They are a people of strength of pride, and their charms reflect this. You see tiny silver eagles, their wings outstretched, symbols of Jupiter, king of the gods. Soldiers wear these eagles, believing they will give them strength, that the eyes of the god will watch over them in battle. You pass a blacksmith's stall, where a burly man hammers a glowing iron ingot, his strong hands moving with practiced skill. Around his thick neck hangs a tiny hammer-shaped charm, a symbol of Vulcan, the god of fire and forge. For him, this is not just a piece of metal, it is a promise of skill, of strength, of protection from the fierce burning flames. And then there are the hands of Sabazios, tiny bronze hands raised in a gesture of blessing, each finger delicately carved, each palm marked with tiny symbols of power. These are charms of protection borrowed from the Eastern mystery cults, and they promise safety, healing, and strength. But while some symbols are ancient, others are personal, tiny shapes that hold meaning only to those who wear them. You see a young man with a tiny silver dolphin hanging from his ear, a charm for safe travels by sea. A young woman wears a delicate golden bee, a symbol of hard work and prosperity. Even the animals that roam the marketplace are symbols. A plump, waddling rooster pecking at scattered seeds is a charm of vigilance, a reminder that the morning light always chases away the darkness. A scruffy sleeping dog curled up beneath a merchant's stall is a living symbol of loyalty, of protection. But there is one symbol you see everywhere, a shape that seems to cling to every corner of the city, the evil eye. Painted on walls, carved into doorways, hanging from necklaces. A single, staring eye, wide and unblinking, its gaze fierce and cold. This is not a charm of protection, but a warning, a reminder of the mal occhio, the evil eye of envy and malice that can strike without warning. And yet even this dark symbol is surrounded by protection, tiny silver crescents, iron fists, polished stones. As you wander deeper into the market, past the shouting merchants and the bright, colorful stalls, you begin to see that these symbols are not just charms, they are a language whispered in silver and bronze, a language of faith and fear, of hope and strength. The Romans live in a world where fate is a constant presence, where the gods are distant but watchful, where luck can change with a single breath. And in that world, these tiny symbols become a quiet way of speaking, a way of saying, I am protected. I am watched over. I am safe. A young woman with a kind smile offers you a tiny silver charm shaped like a star, its delicate points shining in the sunlight. A gift traveler, she whispers, her voice soft. For luck, for light in the darkness. And as you hold the tiny star in your hand, you feel a quiet warmth, a sense that even in this vast, crowded city, even among the noise and the chaos, there is a whisper of hope, a tiny promise that even in the darkness, light can always be found. You smile, thanking her, and as you walk away, the sunlight warm on your face, you realize that these symbols are more than just charms. They are a quiet, whispered promise, a promise that even in a world filled with uncertainty, you are never truly alone. Because as long as you carry a tiny charm, a simple symbol, you carry a whisper of faith. The bustling marketplace fades behind you, and now you find yourself walking through the quiet shaded halls of a Roman temple, a place of whispered prayers, flickering candles, and the soft scent of burning incense. But here, amid the grand statues and sacred altars, you discover another side of Roman magic, a world of healing amulets, charms believed to guard the body and soul against sickness. Rome is a city of life, of crowds of laughter and song. But it is also a city of danger, a place where illness can strike without warning, where the plague can spread through the crowded streets, where a simple cut can turn to fever. And so the Romans cling to their healing charms, tiny amulets that they believe can ward off sickness, ease pain, or even cure disease. You pass a quiet, shadowed alcove where a young priest kneels before a tall, serene statue of Asclepius, the god of healing. His soft voice is a whisper, a gentle prayer for health, and at his feet lie tiny silver charms, little hands polished, crescent moons, delicate flowers, all offerings left by those who hope for a blessing. But the magic of healing amulets is not just found in temples. You see it in the bustling streets, where a mother ties a tiny silver crescent moon, Lunula, around her child's neck, whispering a prayer that it will protect the child from fever. You see it in the crowded marketplace, where an old woman offers tiny polished stones, eye-shaped charms, believed to protect against the evil eye, that unseen force of envy and sickness. But the most powerful of all these charms are the phylacteries, tiny leather pouches tied with thin cords, filled with sacred herbs, blessed salt, and tiny scraps of papyrus inscribed with whispered prayers. A man suffering from a persistent cough might wear one around his neck, a quiet promise that the gods would protect him. A woman suffering from headaches might keep one tucked beneath her pillow, believing that the whispered magic within would bring her peace. A young woman with pale, trembling hands offers a tiny phylactery to a wrinkled, gray-haired healer, her voice a quiet plea. For my husband, he is fevered, his body burns like fire. The healer, her face calm but kind, takes the charm, her fingers brushing over the leather surface. This is blessed, she whispers. Hang it above his bed, light a candle and whisper his name. The gods will hear. But while some healing amulets are simple, others are strange, even frightening. You see a merchant offering tiny bronze snakes, their twisting bodies cool and smooth. These are charms of Glycon, the healing serpent, a symbol of divine medicine. A sick man might wear one around his neck, hoping that the serpent's blessing would cure him. You pass another stall where an old woman offers tiny silver hands, their fingers twisted in a gentle gesture of blessing. These are charms of Sabazios, an ancient healing god. The gentle touch of the hand is believed to soothe pain, to heal the body, and calm the mind. But the most curious of all are the scarabs, tiny beetle-shaped amulets borrowed from the Egyptians. To the Romans, these little beetles are symbols of rebirth, of transformation of life, returning from the shadows. A dying man might be given a scarab, a quiet promise that even in death there is hope. Yet these charms are not just worn by the sick. Healers themselves carry them, tiny polished stones, silver serpents, delicate crescent moons, each one a quiet promise of their skill, a whispered plea for their hands to bring health. You see an old healer, her face blind with age, her hands stained with herbal oils. Around her neck hangs a tiny silver serpent, its coiled body glinting in the soft light. A gift from her mother, she explains a charm that has guarded her family for generations. But while many Romans believe in the power of healing amulets, not all are so trusting. You overhear two young men talking by a temple doorway, their voices hushed but sharp. "It's just a trinket," one mutters, his voice dismissive. "A bit of silver, nothing more." Maybe his friend whispers, "But my sister was fevered for days until the healer gave her a charm. The next morning, she was well." The first man laughs, but there is doubt in his eyes. And perhaps that is the secret of these charms, not the silver or the bronze, not the polished stones or the whispered prayers, but the quiet, desperate faith of those who wear them. As you wander the temple's quiet halls, you see more of these amulets. Tiny silver eyes hanging above doorways, delicate gold crescents hung beside statues of the gods. Even the grand altar itself is surrounded by tiny silver hands, their fingers raised in a gentle gesture of blessing. But beyond these simple charms, you sense a deeper, older magic. The quiet faith of a people who live in a world filled with uncertainty. A world where a sudden fever can steal away a child, where a simple wound can become a mortal danger, where life is always a fragile, flickering flame. And yet, even in this world of shadow and light, the Romans cling to hope. They whisper prayers over tiny charms. They hang silver crescents above their beds. They carry polished stones tied with leather cords. They believe that somewhere in the quiet whispers of their faith, in the delicate shapes of their amulets, there is a promise that they are not alone. A young mother kneels beside a simple shrine. Her hands clasped, her voice a soft murmur. Around her neck hangs a tiny silver crescent, polished and bright, and beside her, her young son clutches a tiny bronze fish, an amulet of protection, a whisper of hope. And as the sunlight streams through the tall open doorway of the temple, you see it, tiny silver charms hanging from the altar, delicate crescent moons, polished hands, tiny serpents, each one a quiet whisper, a tiny promise. For the Romans, healing is not just the touch of a healer's hand or the warmth of a healing potion. It is a whisper of faith, a tiny charm pressed against the heart, a promise that even in the darkness there is a light. And as you step out into the bright sunlit street, the warm breeze brushing against your face, you begin to understand these healing amulets are more than just trinkets. They are a quiet defiance, a promise that even in a world of shadows, life will always find a way. The quiet healing halls of the temple fade behind you, and now you find yourself walking along a shaded garden path where the soft scent of flowers drifts on the warm breeze. Birds sing in the trees, and the sun casts dappled light through the leaves. But here, in this peaceful garden, you discover another world of Roman magic, a world of love and fertility charms. You wander past a shady grove, where a young couple sits together, their fingers intertwined. Around the young woman's neck hangs a tiny silver pendant in the shape of a dove, a symbol of Venus, the goddess of love. It is a simple charm, but to her it is a quiet promise, a hope that her love will be true, that her heart will never be broken. But not all love charms are so innocent. You pass a stall where an old woman sells tiny silver hearts, each one etched with strange swirling symbols. She smiles, her voice a soft knowing whisper. A charm for passion, she murmurs. Wear it close, and his heart will be yours. A young woman leans forward, her cheeks blushing, her voice a shy whisper. Will it work? The old woman's smile widens, her wrinkled eyes sharp. If you believe, my dear. But remember, love gained through magic is never truly yours. And yet for the Romans, the promise of love is worth the risk. You see young men wearing tiny silver roses, charms meant to make them irresistible. Young women carry delicate silver mirrors, polished to a soft, perfect shine, a symbol of beauty and attraction. But while some love charms are meant to draw affection, others are meant to ensure loyalty. A young bride wears a delicate silver chain, each link a tiny polished heart, a whispered promise that her husband's love will never waver. And then there are the charms of fertility. In a quiet, shaded courtyard, a woman kneels before a small statue of Venus. Her hands clasped, her head bowed. Around her neck hangs a tiny silver crescent moon, a symbol of the goddess Diana, protector of women and childbirth. Beneath the statue, tiny offerings lie, scattered delicate flowers, polished stones, and tiny bronze charms shaped like pomegranates, symbols of fertility and abundance. A mother walks by, her young child held close, and you see it, a tiny silver crescent moon tied around the child's neck. A charm not just for protection, but for life itself, a promise that the child will grow strong, that they will live to see many seasons. But not all love charms are gentle. You pass another stall where a grizzled old man offers tiny lead tablets, each one covered in sharp, angry scratches. These are the defixiones, cursed charms meant to bind or break the love of another. A desperate lover might write the name of a rival on one of these tablets, whisper a curse and bury it in the ground, hoping that the rival's love will wither, that their passion will fade. A scorned woman might carve the name of a faithless lover, whispering a curse that his heart will turn cold, that he will suffer as she has. But such charms are dangerous. The old man's voice is a quiet, rough whisper. Use it wisely, traveler, for love gained through hate is a bitter prize. Yet while some Romans use magic to bind or break love, others use it to bless. In a quiet garden, you see a young couple kneeling before a small flower-covered altar. A priestess of Venus, her voice calm and warm, ties a delicate silver ribbon around their joined hands, whispering a blessing for a happy marriage. The young woman smiles, her eyes bright with hope, and around her neck hangs a tiny silver dove, its delicate wings outstretched, a gift from her husband, a promise of love that will never fade. But even here in this peaceful garden, love is not always gentle. You pass a shaded grove where an old woman whispers to a young girl, her voice a soft conspiratorial murmur. If he will not love you, she whispers, make him see you. A touch of his hair, a whispered word, and this charm will do the rest. She presses a tiny polished stone into the girl's hand, a love amulet, a charm meant to kindle desire, to stir the heart. The girl's eyes are wide, her cheeks flushed, her fingers clutching the tiny stone. But is this love, or is it something darker? Desire twisted by magic, a heart bound by a whispered spell. You turn away, wandering through the quiet garden paths, past the blooming roses, the soft swaying leaves. And you begin to see that Roman love charms are a mirror, a reflection of the human heart. Some are gentle, filled with hope and warmth, a promise of love that grows like a delicate flower. Others are fierce, desperate, driven by passion or fear. A young woman ties a tiny silver ribbon around her wrist, whispering a quiet prayer to Venus. "Let his heart be mine," she murmurs. "Let him see me, let him love me." A young man ties a simple leather cord around his wrist, a tiny rose-shaped charm glinting in the sunlight. "For luck," he whispers, "for her smile, just once." But as you wander these quiet paths, you begin to understand. Love is a magic of its own, a magic stronger than any charm, brighter than any whispered spell. The charms are only whispers, only hopes, only the quiet, trembling dreams of those who fear that love will slip through their fingers. Because in Rome, as in any place, love is a quiet, fragile thing, a candle flickering in the darkness, a whisper beneath the stars. And for those who fear losing it, even the tiniest charm can become a promise, a shield, a silent prayer. A soft breeze stirs the leaves, and the scent of roses fills the air. You pass a delicate statue of Venus, her calm, smiling face bathed in the warm sunlight. Around her feet lie tiny silver doves, polished crescent moons, and delicate rose petals, whispers of love, tiny promises left by those who believe. Because here in ancient Rome, love is not just a feeling, it is a hope, a promise, a quiet magic that whispers through the gardens, that lingers in the scent of flowers, that shines in the soft glow of a tiny silver charm. The scent of roses and the quiet whisper of love charms fade behind you, and now you find yourself walking through the bustling, sunlit streets of a Roman neighborhood, a place of narrow alleys, simple clay houses, and the laughter of children chasing each other beneath the warm blue sky. But as you wander these quiet streets, you notice something curious, tiny, glinting charms hanging around the necks of nearly every child. These are the protective amulets for children, tiny charms given at birth, whispered over by mothers, blessed by priests, and worn as shields against the unseen dangers of the world. For in ancient Rome, childhood is a fragile thing, a time of innocence, but also a time of danger. You pass a young mother, her arms wrapped protectively around her wide-eyed toddler. Around the child's neck hangs a tiny rounded locket, a bullae, the most common of all Roman amulets for children. It is a simple charm often made of leather for the poor, silver, or even gold for the wealthy. But inside this little locket is a tiny secret, a pebble, a scrap of blessed cloth, or a tiny silver crescent, all meant to guard the child from sickness, from envy, from the evil eye. The mother's fingers brush against the locket, her lips moving in a quiet, whispered prayer. "Stay safe, my little one. May the darkness never touch you." And it is not just the youngest children who wear these charms. You see older boys, their cheeks sunburned from playing beneath the bright sun, each one with a tiny crescent moon amulet, Lunula, hanging from a leather cord. A simple charm, but one believed to guard against sickness, to keep away evil spirits. But it is not just the children of the poor who wear these amulets. You pass a grand villa, its marble columns rising against the blue sky, and there in the shaded garden, a young girl plays with a polished silver crescent around her neck, its surface bright in the sunlight. Her mother watches from the colonnade, her gaze calm but watchful, her fingers brushing against a tiny silver dove at her own neck, a charm for peace, for safety. As you walk further, you see that these charms are not just protection, they are promises whispered, hopes pressed into silver and leather. A young boy runs laughing through the crowded street, his tiny bullae bouncing against his chest, and you notice a small, polished, fish-shaped charm tied to the leather cord. A gift from his fisherman father, a quiet wish that the boy will always have food, always find his way home. A young girl stands beside a simple shrine, her hands clasped, her voice, a soft, whispered prayer. Around her neck hangs a tiny silver star, a charm for light, for guidance. Blessed Diana, guard me in the darkness, she whispers, her eyes filled with quiet faith. But while most children wear their charms openly, some wear them in secret. You see a quiet, serious boy with dark, watchful eyes, a simple leather cord tied around his wrist. Beneath his sleeve, a tiny bronze amulet, a gift from his grandmother, a charm she blessed with a whispered prayer, a tiny shield against misfortune. You turn a corner and find yourself in a small, shaded courtyard where an old woman sits beneath a tall, spreading olive tree. Before her, a young mother kneels, her baby cradled in her arms. The old woman's fingers brush against a tiny silver crescent, whispering a quiet blessing. Blessed Diana, watch over this child. Let sickness turn away. Let shadows flee. The young mother's eyes are filled with quiet hope, her fingers clutching the tiny charm. Thank you, she whispers, her voice trembling. But not all charms are so gentle. You see a young boy with a rough, twisted piece of iron hanging from his neck, a charm meant to guard against the evil eye, that silent, invisible force of envy and malice. His grandmother ties the charm tightly, her wrinkled fingers, careful, her voice a quiet murmur. Let envy turn away. Let harm pass by. And it is not just human envy that these charms protect against. A young girl wears a tiny silver serpent around her wrist, a charm believed to guard against wild animals, to protect her when she wanders beyond the village. Even the gods themselves are called upon for protection. A young boy wears a tiny bronze eagle, its wings outstretched, a symbol of Jupiter, king of the gods. His father is a soldier, and the boy whispers a quiet prayer each night, clutching the tiny eagle. Father, be safe. Jupiter, protect him. But while most children wear their charms with quiet faith, others cling to them in fear. You see a small boy with tear-filled eyes, his tiny bullae pressed tightly to his chest, his voice a quiet, trembling whisper. Don't leave me. Don't leave me. His mother's fingers brush against his cheek, her voice calm but firm. The charm will protect you, my love. It will guard you even when I'm away. And in this world of whispers and quiet faith, you begin to see the truth of these charms. They are not just tiny shields, they are whispers of love, of fear, of hope. A mother ties a tiny silver crescent around her child's neck, her fingers trembling. A father hands his son a tiny bronze fish, a quiet promise that he will return. A grandmother blesses a tiny amulet, her voice a soft, gentle murmur. For the Romans, childhood is a time of magic, but also a time of danger. A time when the shadows seem larger, when the world is filled with unseen threats. And so they cling to these tiny charms, these quiet promises that their children will be safe, that they will grow strong, that they will live to see the warm sunlight of another day. You walk further, and the quiet, peaceful courtyard fades behind you. But even as you step back into the crowded, sunlit streets, you see them, tiny silver crescents, little leather bullae, polished stones tied with simple cords. Whispers of faith, promises, whispered over tiny charms. And you begin to understand, for the Romans, these charms are not just magic. They are love, love pressed into silver, and leather shaped love, whispered over a tiny child as they drift to sleep. Love that clings to hope even in a world of shadows. The quiet, sunlit streets of Rome fade behind you, and now you find yourself standing before a grand, bustling Roman villa, a place of tall marble columns, lush gardens, and quiet, shaded courtyards. But even here, amid the laughter of wealthy guests, the soft murmur of servants, and the sweet scent of flowers, you notice something: tiny charms hanging above doorways, delicate symbols carved into the wooden lintels, little statues tucked beneath flowering vines. These are the household charms and protective symbols of ancient Rome, magical amulets not worn around the neck, but hung above doors, placed in corners, buried beneath thresholds. For the Romans do not just guard their bodies, they guard their homes, believing that these quiet magical tokens can keep away sickness, fire, theft, and even the wrath of the gods. You pass beneath a grand vine-covered archway, and there, hanging from a thin cord, you see it a tiny silver bell, its delicate surface glinting in the sunlight. It sways gently in the warm breeze, and with every soft chime, it whispers a quiet promise of protection. The bell is a charm meant to keep away evil spirits, a tiny shield that drives away the darkness with every gentle note. But the bell is just the beginning. As you wander through the villa's shaded courtyards, you see more charms, tiny bronze hands carved in the Figa gesture, their fingers twisted in a protective sign. A young servant girl kneels beside a tall flowering bush, her fingers pressing a tiny silver crescent moon into the soil. She murmurs a quiet prayer, a whispered plea for the goddess Diana to protect the garden, to keep it lush and blooming. Her master watches from the shaded colonnade, his face calm, but his gaze sharp, a tiny bronze eagle glinting on his ring, a symbol of Jupiter, a quiet promise of divine protection. But while some charms are small and simple, others are grand. You step into a cool, shaded atrium where a tall, fierce statue of Hercules stands, his muscled form holding a great club, his calm, powerful gaze watching over the household. To the Romans, Hercules is not just a hero, he is a guardian, a protector. A family might place his statue at the entrance to their home, believing that his strength will keep away thieves, fire, and misfortune. In another courtyard, you see a tiny, delicate statue of Laris, The household gods, small dancing figures with gentle smiling faces. These are the lares familiares, the spirits who guard the home, who watch over the family, who ensure peace and prosperity. A young woman stands before the shrine, her hands clasped, her voice a soft, trembling murmur. Guard my father, bring him home safe. Let our home be blessed. But while some household charms are gentle, others are fierce. You see it in the grand marble hall, a large painted fresco of a fierce serpent, its coiled body twisting across the wall, its sharp, staring eyes watching all who enter. This is the genius loci, the spirit of the place, a guardian serpent believed to protect the home from intruders to strike down those who bring harm. But these protective symbols are not just for the wealthy. You step out into the sunlit alleyways of a crowded Roman neighborhood, and here too you see the quiet magic of household charms. Simple clay hands tied above doorways, little iron nails driven into door frames. Charms meant to guard against sickness, against envy, against bad luck. An old woman sits on her doorstep, a tiny iron rooster hanging from the lintel above her door. A charm of vigilance, a promise that the morning light will always drive away the darkness. Her wrinkled fingers brush against the tiny charm, her voice a quiet whispered murmur. Wake before the shadows, chase away the dark. And then there are the tiny phallus-shaped fascina, crude but powerful, hanging from walls, carved above doorways, even painted in bright colors on the walls of shops. A merchant stands proudly before his painted charm, his voice a cheerful laugh. For luck, my friends. No thief dares touch a shop guarded by the Fascinum. You wander further and you see other charms, tiny knotted cords hung in windows to guard against the evil eye. Little bronze keys, symbols of safety, hung above doorways. Even the simple chalk-drawn symbols on the ground, crossed lines, swirling spirals, are whispers of magic charms meant to protect. But these charms are not just shields, they are promises. A mother hangs a tiny silver crescent moon above her child's cradle, whispering a quiet prayer that sickness will never touch her little one. A young couple places a tiny bronze dove in their garden, a symbol of Venus, a hope for love and happiness. Even the animals that wander the streets carry their own quiet magic. A cat, its sleek black fur shining in the sunlight, stretches lazily beneath a shaded doorway. To the Romans, a cat is a guardian of the home, a hunter of mice, a protector of grain, a quiet spirit that keeps the darkness at bay. But not all charms are gentle. You see a young man painting a strange twisted symbol on his door, a twisting serpent with an open mouth, its tongue a flicker of flame. A charm meant not just to protect, but to curse an angry whisper that any who enter with malice will suffer. An old man watches from his doorstep, his voice a quiet, rough whisper. Be careful with such charms, boy. Protection can become a trap. The shadows you call on may not leave. But even here, amid these quiet alleyways, the charms are everywhere. Tiny silver crescents hanging from windows, little bronze roosters perched above doors, crude iron hands nailed to door frames. Whispers of faith, quiet shields against a world where the shadows are always close. And as you wander back into the warm, sunlit garden of the villa, the sweet scent of flowers drifting on the breeze, You see it, a young woman, her fingers pressing a tiny silver star into the soil, her voice a soft, gentle whisper. Let our home be blessed. Let it be a place of peace. And you begin to understand. For the Romans, these household charms are not just decorations. They are whispers of hope, promises of safety, tiny shields against a world where fortune can change with a single breath. Because in ancient Rome, even the grandest villa, even the humblest shack, is a place of faith, a place guarded by tiny charms, by whispered prayers, by quiet hopes. And as the warm sunlight touches your face, you feel a quiet peace, a sense that even in a world filled with shadows, there is always a light, a whisper of safety, a quiet promise of protection. The shaded courtyards of the Roman villa fade behind you, and now you find yourself walking through the crowded sunlit streets of a bustling Roman market, a place of color, noise, and life. But here, amid the shouts of merchants, the laughter of children, and the warm scent of fresh bread, you notice something strange. Tiny staring eyes, painted on walls carved into doorways, even hanging from silver chains. These are the charms against the evil eye, a silent watchful force that the Romans feared more than almost any other curse. For in their world, the evil eye, malocchio, was a constant invisible threat, a force of envy and malice that could bring sickness, misfortune, or even death with a single hateful glance. You pass a stall where a young woman sells tiny silver pendants, each one shaped like a single wide staring eye. Protection against envy, she whispers, her voice soft but serious. Wear it, and the evil eye will turn away. But what is this evil eye that the Romans fear so deeply? To them, it is not just a symbol, it is a force, a quiet poison carried by those who look with envy, with hatred, with jealousy. It is the gaze of the envious neighbor, the bitter rival, the stranger, who smiles but wishes harm. A young mother walks by her baby, held close, and you see it, a tiny silver crescent moon tied around the child's neck, a charm meant to guard against the evil eye. Her fingers brush against the tiny charm, her lips moving in a quiet, whispered prayer. Let no envy touch you. Let no shadow fall. But while some protect themselves with silver eyes, others use different charms. You see a merchant selling tiny bronze hands, Figa amulets. Their fingers twisted in a strange, familiar gesture, the thumb pressed between the index and middle fingers. It is a crude shape, almost comical, but it is a powerful shield against the evil eye, a quiet, whispered defiance. A young man with sharp eyes and a nervous smile purchases one, his fingers clutching it tightly. Better safe than cursed. He mutters, his voice a faint and nervous laugh. You wander further, and you see another stall where an old woman sells tiny silver phalluses, each one hanging from delicate chains. Crude, even vulgar, but to the Romans, this is a charm of great power, a symbol of fertility, of strength, but most of all of protection against the evil eye. The old woman's voice is a soft, knowing murmur. The evil eye fears the phallus. It turns away. It cannot harm. But it is not just jewelry that carries these protective symbols. You pass a simple sunlit home, and above the doorway, you see it, a painted eye, its wide staring gaze watching all who enter. Beneath it, A tiny iron bell sways in the warm breeze, its gentle chime a quiet promise that the evil eye will be driven away. A young boy runs past his tiny bullae, bouncing against his chest, and you notice it, a tiny polished eye-shaped charm, its surface warm and smooth. His mother watches from the doorway, her fingers brushing against a tiny silver crescent at her neck, her voice a quiet murmur. Be safe, my child. May no shadow follow you. But while most Romans wear these charms for protection, some use them as weapons. In a shadowed alley, you see a young woman pressing a tiny lead tablet into the dirt, her voice a soft, angry whisper. Let his gaze turn against him. Let his envy become his pain. These are the defixiones, the cursed charms of Rome, tiny lead tablets inscribed with the names of enemies, buried beneath doorways, thrown into wells, or nailed to the walls of tombs. A dark magic, a desperate whisper for vengeance. An old man watches from the shadows, his voice a quiet, rough whisper. Careful with curses, child. The shadows you call upon can follow you. But most Romans do not wish to harm. They simply wish to protect. You pass a bustling bakery, the warm scent of fresh bread filling the air, and you see it, a tiny silver bell hanging above the doorway, its delicate chime a quiet, constant song. The baker, a plump, cheerful woman, laughs, her voice bright. The bell keeps away envy. Let them stare, I have bread enough for all. In another stall, a young woman sells tiny silver crescent moons, each one polished to a bright shine. Her fingers brush against the delicate charms, her voice a soft, gentle whisper. For protection, for peace. But as you wander through the market, you begin to understand. The evil eye is not just a curse, it is a fear, a whisper of danger that can come from anywhere, from anyone. A jealous rival, a spiteful neighbor, even a friendly smile that hides envy. And so the Romans surround themselves with these quiet shields, silver eyes that stare back, twisted hands that defy tiny bells that whisper in the breeze. Even the grand marble temples are not free from this quiet fear. You see it above the great doorway of a temple, to Jupiter, a wide staring eye, painted in bright clear colors, watching all who enter. But it is not just the temples that are guarded. You pass a quiet, shaded garden where a young woman kneels before a statue of Venus. Around the statue's neck hangs a delicate silver crescent, and at its feet lie tiny offerings, polished stones, delicate flowers, and a single silver eye-shaped charm. Let envy turn away. The young woman whispers, her voice soft. Let love be true. Let no shadow touch my heart. Even the grand villas, with their tall, polished columns and lush gardens, are guarded by these quiet charms. A wealthy merchant stands beneath his marble colonnade, his fingers brushing against a tiny silver eye pinned to his cloak. Fortune is a jealous mistress, he murmurs, but I'm watched over. But while the wealthy may wear silver and gold, the poor guard themselves with simpler charms. A rough, twisted iron nail hung above a doorway. A simple clay figure, its eyes wide and staring. Even the crude chalk-drawn symbols on the ground, crossed lines swirling spirals, are quiet shields, whispered prayers that the shadows will never fall. As you wander further, the warm sunlight touching your face, You begin to see that the evil eye is more than just a curse. It is a shadow, a fear of misfortune, a quiet whispered danger that can strike without warning. But the Romans are not powerless. They wear their charms with quiet faith. They hang silver eyes above their doors. They whisper prayers over tiny silver crescents. They believe that even in a world filled with envy, with malice, with silent staring shadows, there is a light, a quiet whispered promise of protection. And as you walk beneath the warm sunlight, the breeze brushing against your face, you see it, a young woman tying a tiny silver eye around her wrist, her fingers trembling, her voice a soft, gentle whisper. Let them look, let them envy, but let their shadows never touch me, because here in ancient Rome, the evil eye is a shadow that can follow anyone but the light of a tiny charm. A whispered prayer is a shield that can never be broken. The bustling sunlit streets of the Roman marketplace fade behind you, and now you find yourself in the shadowed candlelit corner of a quiet Roman workshop, a place filled with the soft scent of melting wax, the sharp earthy aroma of fresh herbs, and the faint whisper of a priest's voice. Here, among the flickering shadows, you discover the secret world of magical inscriptions and spells, the whispered words that give Roman amulets their power. For the Romans, a charm is more than just a piece of metal, a polished stone, or a delicate symbol. It is a vessel, a tiny sacred container for a whispered prayer, a hidden name, a secret phrase. And it is these words, these magical inscriptions, that turn a simple trinket into a whisper of divine power. You watch as an old man, his hands steady despite his age, carefully etches a tiny twisting symbol into the surface of a silver pendant. His voice is a soft, gentle murmur, his gaze focused. By the light of Apollo, by the wisdom of Minerva, let this charm bring knowledge. The young woman beside him nods, her eyes filled with quiet hope. For my studies, she whispers, her voice trembling, so that I may remember, so that I may learn. The old man smiles, his wrinkled face calm. And you shall wear it close, and the light of wisdom will be yours. But not all magical inscriptions are so simple. You see another charm, a tiny polished lead tablet, its surface covered in sharp, twisting letters. These are the defixiones, cursed charms, tiny lead sheets inscribed with the names of enemies buried beneath doorways, thrown into wells, or nailed to the walls of tombs. Dark magic whispered in angry words. A young man stands beside the old man, his voice a low, desperate whisper. Let his wealth wither, let his love turn cold, let his strength fade. The old man's eyes are sharp, his voice a quiet warning. Curses are a shadow, young one. They cling to those who speak them. But the young man's gaze is fierce, his hands trembling. He betrayed me. He took everything. This is justice. The old man sighs, his fingers tracing the sharp, twisted letters of the cursed charm. Justice or vengeance? Be certain, child, for shadows do not forget. But while some inscriptions are meant to curse, others are meant to protect. You pass another table where a young woman carefully writes a tiny swirling prayer on a scrap of papyrus, her voice a soft whispered murmur. By the light of Diana, let my child be safe. Let sickness turn away. She folds the tiny papyrus, slipping it into a delicate silver locket, a tiny bullae, a charm meant to guard her child. Her fingers brush against the silver surface, her voice a quiet, trembling whisper. Be safe, my little one. Be strong. And it is not just mothers who cling to these whispered charms. You see a young soldier with a fierce, determined gaze, holding a polished iron amulet in his hands. Etched into its surface are the names of 3 gods, Mars, Jupiter, and Fortuna, the gods of war, of strength, of luck. Let them watch over me, he whispers, his voice a quiet prayer. Let my blade be true. Let the darkness turn away. The old man's voice is calm, his fingers tracing the sharp, clear letters. 3 names, 3 lights. They will guide you. But while most magical inscriptions are written in Latin or Greek, some are stranger, twisting symbols. Strange, jagged letters in languages forgotten by all but a few. You see it on a small dark amulet, a tiny iron ring, its surface covered in strange twisting runes. A young man with dark, thoughtful eyes holds it, his voice a soft whisper. They are the words of the Etruscans. He murmurs, his voice almost reverent. The language of the dead, a charm for wisdom, for hidden knowledge. The old man's voice is quiet but curious. And do you understand them? The young man smiles, his fingers tracing the twisting letters. No, but perhaps that is the magic. But while some inscriptions are written in ink or etched in metal, others are whispered, carried on the breath, a quiet magic that lingers like mist. You see it in the crowded market, where an old woman presses a tiny silver crescent into a young girl's hand, her voice a soft, gentle murmur. By the light of the moon, let your heart be strong. Let your spirit never fade. The girl smiles, clutching the tiny charm, her voice a quiet whisper. Thank you. But not all whispered charms are so gentle. You pass a shadowed alley where a young woman whispers over a tiny wax doll, her voice sharp, angry. Let his love wither. Let his heart turn cold. These are the binding spells, a darker form of magic, whispers meant to control, to bind, to twist the hearts of others. And while some fear them, others embrace them, desperate lovers, vengeful rivals, the wounded who whisper for justice. But even here, among these whispered curses and desperate prayers, there is light. You pass another table where a young mother carefully writes her child's name on a tiny strip of parchment, her voice a soft, loving whisper. Be blessed, my little one. Let the light always find you. She slips the parchment into a delicate silver bullae, tying it around the child's neck. And as the child laughs, his tiny hands clutching the charm, you feel a quiet warmth, a sense of peace, of protection. Because for the Romans, these magical inscriptions are not just words, they are promises. Promises whispered in silver, etched in iron, written in delicate papyrus. Promises that no matter what darkness may come, there is always a light, a whisper of faith, a quiet shield against the shadows. You wander further, the flickering candlelight dancing across your face, and you see them tiny charms covered in twisting letters, silver pendants etched with whispered prayers, delicate scrolls tied with red ribbon. Each one a promise, a whispered hope. And as you step back out into the warm, sunlit street, the soft breeze brushing against your face, you feel it a quiet, gentle warmth. A sense that even in a world filled with shadows, even beneath the watchful gaze of the evil eye, there is a light whispered in words, a promise carried in silver and stone. Because in ancient Rome, words are more than sounds, they are magic. They are hope. They are a whisper of light in the darkness. The warm, sunlit streets of Rome fade behind you, and now you find yourself walking beneath the grand, towering columns of a temple, a place of flickering candlelight, the sweet scent of burning incense, and the soft murmur of prayers. But here, amid the quiet shadows and the sacred statues, you discover another world of Roman amulets, a world of religious charms and divine protection. For the Romans, the gods are not just distant, silent figures. They are watchful, powerful, and ever-present. And so their amulets are not just magical trinkets. They are sacred promises, tiny shields of faith, whispered prayers carved in silver and gold. You pass a young woman kneeling before a tall, serene statue of Venus, the goddess of love. Around her neck hangs a delicate silver dove, its tiny wings outstretched, a charm of love, a promise that the goddess will guide her heart. Her fingers brush against the tiny charm, her voice a soft, trembling whisper. Bless me, sweet Venus. Let my love be true. Let my heart be safe. But it is not just Venus who watches over the faithful. In another quiet corner, you see a soldier, his face lined with scars, his armor battered and worn. Around his neck hangs a tiny bronze eagle, its wings wide and fierce, a symbol of Jupiter, king of the gods. His voice is a quiet, rough whisper. Jupiter, watch over me, guide my sword, grant me strength. And then there are the charms of Mars, the god of war. A young centurion wears a polished iron ring, its surface etched with a tiny, fierce wolf Mars, sacred animal. Around his wrist, a simple leather cord, tied with a tiny iron spear, a promise of courage, of victory, of strength. But not all divine charms are fierce. You pass a gentle shaded garden where a young mother ties a tiny silver crescent around her child's neck, a charm of Diana, goddess of the moon, protector of women and children. Her voice is a soft, loving murmur. Diana, guard my little one. Let no shadow touch her. Even the grand temples themselves are filled with these quiet charms. At the foot of a towering statue of Apollo, you see tiny silver lyres, delicate golden laurels, little sun-shaped pendants, all left as offerings, tiny whispers of faith from those who seek the god's light, his healing, his wisdom. A young poet stands before the statue, his fingers clutching a polished silver lyre, his voice a quiet, desperate whisper. Apollo, grant me words. Let my voice be true. Let my song be heard. But while some charms are offerings, others are shields. You see it in the shaded colonnade. A young woman ties a tiny silver eye-shaped charm around her wrist, a symbol of Minerva, goddess of wisdom. Her voice is calm but firm. Let me see the truth. Let lies turn away. And even the humble households are touched by this quiet faith. You pass a small, crowded home where a wrinkled old woman ties a tiny silver serpent above her doorway, a symbol of Aesculapius, the god of healing. Her voice is a soft, gentle murmur. Let sickness turn away. Let health abide. But it is not just the major gods who are called upon. You see tiny polished silver nuts, symbols of Sylvanus, the god of the woods, tied to the branches of a tall leafy tree. A young farmer kneels before the tree, his voice a quiet prayer. Sylvanus, protect my crops. Let them grow tall, let them be strong. Even the mysterious, shadowed gods of the underworld are given their charms. You see a tiny, polished pomegranate, a symbol of Persephone, queen of the underworld, left at the foot of a small, dark shrine. A woman with tear-filled eyes whispers a quiet, desperate prayer. Persephone, guide his soul. Let him find peace. But while some divine charms are simple, others are strange. Tiny silver hands marked with ancient symbols. Charms of Sabazios, a mysterious healing god from the east. A healer wears one around her neck, her fingers brushing against it as she whispers a quiet blessing over a sick child. Sabazios brings strength. Let life return. You step further into the temple's cool, shaded halls, and you see them tiny silver crescents for Diana, delicate golden bees for Ceres, goddess of the harvest, little iron hammers for Vulcan, god of fire and forge. Each one a quiet promise, a whispered plea. And it is not just the charms themselves that carry magic. It is the faith of those who wear them. A young priest kneels before the altar of Mercury, his fingers clutching a tiny silver caduceus, the sacred staff of the messenger god. Guide my words, Mercury. Let them be swift, let them be true. A merchant stands before a statue of Fortuna, goddess of luck, his voice a soft, hopeful murmur. Around his neck hangs a tiny silver wheel, a charm of fortune. Fortuna, favor me. Let my trade prosper. But the most powerful charms are those blessed by the priests themselves. Tiny silver pendants dipped in sacred water, delicate bronze crescents marked with sacred symbols, tiny strips of papyrus inscribed with whispered prayers. To wear such a charm is to carry a piece of the divine, a quiet promise that the gods are near. And even here in the shadowed halls of the temple, there are those who whisper of darker charms, tiny silver serpents for Hecate, goddess of magic, tiny iron keys for Janus, the god of doorways and secrets. A young woman stands before a shadowed altar, her voice a soft trembling whisper. Hecate, show me the hidden path. Let my shadow be my guide. But even among these quiet whispered prayers, there is a light. A young mother kneels before a statue of Juno, her fingers brushing against a tiny silver peacock, a symbol of the goddess. Juno, protect my marriage. Let love always be in my home. And as you wander back out into the warm, sunlit courtyard, the sweet scent of burning incense lingering in the air, you see it, a young man kneeling before a tiny shrine, his fingers pressing a polished silver laurel against his forehead, his voice a soft, hopeful whisper. Apollo, guide me. Let my song be true. Let my voice be heard. Because in ancient Rome, these divine amulets are not just symbols, they are whispers of faith. tiny promises carried in silver and bronze, a quiet shield against a world where the gods are always watching. And as the warm sunlight touches your face, the soft breeze brushing against your hair, you feel it a quiet, gentle peace. A sense that even in a world filled with shadows, even beneath the gaze of the gods, there is always light, a light whispered in silver, a promise of protection. The quiet, sacred halls of the temple fade behind you, and now you find yourself stepping into the bustling, sunlit chaos of a Roman marketplace, a place of color noise and endless movement. But here, amid the crowded stalls, the sharp scent of spices, and the warm glow of sunlight on polished metal, you discover another world of Roman magic, a world where amulets are made and sold. This is the heart of Roman superstition, where charms of silver, bronze, iron, and polished stone hang from tiny hooks, their delicate shapes catching the light, their whispered promises sold for a few coins. And here in this marketplace of faith, the Romans trade in hope. You pass a stall where an old woman, her face lined with age, but her eyes sharp, carefully ties tiny silver crescents to thin leather cords. Her voice is a quiet, warm murmur as she hands one to a young mother, her fingers brushing against the tiny charm. "For your child," the old woman whispers, "Diana's light. Let sickness never touch them." The young mother smiles, her fingers clutching the tiny silver moon, her voice a soft, trembling whisper, "Thank you." But this is just the beginning. You wander further, and you see another stall, a brightly painted table, covered in tiny, twisting silver serpents, their delicate bodies coiled in elegant spirals. The merchant, a young man with a warm smile, offers one to a young soldier. "For courage," he whispers, "a serpent of Aesculapius, for health, for strength." The soldier's fingers close around the tiny charm, his voice a quiet, hopeful murmur. Let it be so. But while some charms are simple, others are strange. You pass a stall where a wrinkled old man sells tiny, polished scarabs, their black surfaces smooth and glinting in the sunlight. A young girl gazes at them, her voice a soft, curious whisper. "What are they?" she asks. The old man smiles, his voice a quiet, knowing murmur. "The beetles of Egypt, little one. Symbols of rebirth, of life renewed, wear one and no shadow will touch you." Shadow. But it is not just the charms themselves that are bought and sold. It is the words, the whispered blessings, the quiet, sacred promises that give them life. You pass another stall where a young woman carefully inscribes tiny silver pendants with swirling symbols, her voice a soft whispered prayer. "By the light of Apollo, let this charm bring wisdom. By the grace of Venus, let this charm bring love." A merchant stands nearby, his voice a warm, cheerful laugh. "A charm without a blessing is just metal, my friend. But with a blessing, that is magic. And it is not just the charms for sale that carry this magic. You pass a tiny, crowded workshop where a blacksmith's hammer rings out in sharp, rhythmic strikes. His hands are strong, his gaze focused, and you see it, a tiny iron fist, Figa, shaped beneath his hammer, its twisted fingers a promise of protection. A young woman waits by the door, her voice a soft, hopeful whisper. "Is it ready?" The blacksmith smiles, his rough hands lifting the tiny iron charm. ready and strong. Wear it close, and the evil eye will never touch you. But while most charms are made in open daylight, some are born in shadow. You pass a narrow twisting alley where an old woman, her wrinkled face hidden beneath a dark hood, whispers over a tiny lead tablet, her voice a sharp, angry murmur. Let his love wither. Let his voice fall silent. Let his fortune turn to dust. These are the defixiones, the cursed charms born of envy, of hatred, of vengeance. A young woman watches her face pale but fierce, her fingers trembling. Will it work? She whispers. The old woman's smile is a quiet, shadowed whisper. If you believe, but not all charms are so dark. You wander further, and you see another stall, one filled with tiny, delicate, dove-shaped pendants, each one polished to a bright, soft glow. A young girl holds one, her voice a soft, hopeful whisper. For love, she asks. The merchant's smile is warm, his voice a gentle murmur. For Venus, my dear, for love, for joy, for peace. A young man beside her smiles his fingers, brushing against a tiny silver rose-shaped charm. Will it make her love me? He asks, his voice a quiet, nervous laugh. The merchant's smile widens. If your heart is true, but it is not just silver and bronze that carry this magic. You pass a tiny, crowded stall where an old woman offers bundles of herbs, dried lavender for peace, rosemary for protection, tiny bundles of sage for wisdom. To the Romans, even the simplest plants carry quiet magic, their scents a whisper of the divine. Burn this. The old woman whispers, her voice soft but clear. Let the smoke fill your home. Let the shadows turn away. And even here in this bustling marketplace, there is a quiet faith. A young mother ties a tiny silver crescent around her baby's neck, her voice a soft whispered prayer. Be safe, my little one. Let sickness never touch you. A fisherman purchases a tiny bronze fish-shaped charm, his rough fingers brushing against its cool, polished surface. For the sea, he whispers, let the waves be gentle, let the nets be full. But even amid the bustling stalls, the laughter, the whispered prayers, you sense a quiet fear, the same fear that whispers through every Roman home. A fear of sickness, of envy, of misfortune. A fear that the gods are watching, that shadows linger just beyond the sunlight. And that is why they buy these charms, why they whisper over tiny silver crescents, why they tie polished stones around their wrists, why they believe in the quiet magic of a whispered blessing. For the Romans, these amulets are not just trinkets, they are shields, tiny whispered promises that the shadows will never touch them. And for those who believe they are a light in the darkness, as you wander back toward the sunlit square, you see it, a young girl running her tiny silver crescent, bouncing against her chest, her laughter bright and clear. Her mother watches her fingers clutching a tiny silver dove, her voice a soft whispered murmur. Be safe, my love, be safe. And you begin to understand. In this bustling marketplace, where silver glints in the sunlight, where laughter mixes with whispered prayers, these tiny charms are more than just metal, more than just stone. They are hope. They are faith. They are a promise that no matter how dark the world may become, there is always a light a light that can be carried in a tiny silver crescent, a polished bronze fish, a whispered blessing. And as the warm sunlight touches your face, the cool breeze brushing against your hair, you feel it a quiet, gentle peace. A sense that even in a world filled with shadows, there is always a light, a whisper of faith. The bustling, sunlit marketplace fades behind you, and now you find yourself walking along a quiet, mist-shrouded path at the edge of the city. The air is cool. The faint scent of damp earth rises around you, and the soft murmur of distant prayers drifts on the breeze. But here in this peaceful, shadowed place, you discover the final chapter of Rome's magical world, the quiet, solemn story of how amulet culture began to fade. Rome is changing. The grand temples that once rang with the prayers of the faithful are quieter now. The gods who watched from their marble pedestals seem distant, their altars cold, their shrines shadowed. And in the crowded streets, in the bustling markets, a new faith is spreading, a faith that whispers of a single God, a faith that calls for light in a world of shadows. You walk along the narrow path and see it, an old man kneeling before a tiny shrine, his wrinkled fingers clutching a tiny silver crescent, his voice a soft, trembling whisper. Diana, protect my daughter. Let sickness never touch her. But beside him, a young woman watches her face calm but sad. Around her neck hangs a tiny wooden cross, its surface smooth and plain. Her voice is a quiet, gentle murmur. The old gods are silent, Father. They cannot help. The old man's eyes are filled with quiet grief, his fingers still clutching the tiny charm. But they have watched over us, always. But the world is changing. You pass another quiet, sunlit courtyard where an old woman ties a tiny silver crescent around her grandchild's neck. Her voice is a soft, whispered prayer. Diana, guard my little one. But her daughter watches her fingers brushing against a small iron cross pinned to her cloak. It is only a trinket, Mother. Our faith is in the light. This new faith, Christianity, is spreading its quiet, whispered promises, touching the hearts of the poor, the weary, the hopeless. For while the old gods are fierce, powerful, and distant, this new faith speaks of love, of light, of salvation. You pass a small, shadowed chapel where a young man kneels before a simple wooden cross. His voice, a soft, desperate prayer. Guide me, Lord. Let me be forgiven. Let the darkness turn away. But even as this new faith spreads, the old charms remain. You pass another tiny, crowded alley where an old woman sells tiny silver crescents, little bronze hands, polished stones. Her voice is a soft, knowing whisper. For protection, my dear. Even the faithful need a little luck. A young woman hesitates, her fingers brushing against the tiny cross at her neck. Is it wrong, she whispers, to wear both? The old woman smiles, her voice a warm, gentle murmur. Faith is a light, my dear, but a charm is a whisper, a promise. Sometimes even the faithful need a whisper. But the power of the charms is fading. You pass a grand temple of Jupiter, its towering columns rising against the bright, clear sky. But the steps are empty, the altar cold. The great fierce statue of Jupiter watches over the empty hall, his eyes sharp but silent. In the shadowed doorway, An old priest stands, his fingers clutching a tiny silver eagle, a charm of Jupiter, a promise of strength. But his voice is a quiet, trembling whisper. Great Jupiter, do you still watch over us, or has the light gone? And even the merchants who once sold charms by the hundreds now whisper of a fading magic. A young girl stands beside a brightly painted stall, her fingers brushing against a tiny silver dove, her voice a soft, uncertain murmur. Will it work? Will it bring love? The merchant smiles, but there is a sadness in his eyes. If you believe, my dear, if you believe. But for many, belief is fading. The old gods are silent, their temples quiet. The whispered prayers of the faithful are turning to new words, new songs, new hopes. And yet even here in this world of change, the charms do not disappear. A young mother ties a tiny silver crescent around her child's neck, her voice a soft whispered prayer. Be safe, my love. Let no shadow touch you. A soldier, his armor scratched and worn, ties a tiny silver eagle to his belt, his voice a quiet, fierce whisper. Jupiter, watch over me. Let my blade be true. A young bride, her veil soft and white, wears a tiny silver dove around her neck, a gift from her mother. Her voice is a soft, hopeful whisper. Let our love be blessed. Because even as the world changes, even as the temples fall silent, even as the old gods fade into shadows, the quiet whispered hope of a charm remains. And as you wander through the misty shadowed streets, you begin to see it, the quiet truth of Rome's amulet culture. It is not just about magic, about gods, about whispered prayers. It is about hope. It is about the quiet, trembling faith of those who live in a world of shadows. A young man stands beneath a tall, dark tree, his fingers clutching a tiny silver fish, a gift from his mother, a charm for safe travels. His voice is a quiet, trembling whisper. Let me return home. Let me see her again. An old woman ties a tiny silver crescent above her doorway, her fingers trembling, her voice a soft whispered prayer. Diana, guard my home. Let peace abide. And even in the shadowed alleys, where the light is faint, you see them, tiny charms, tied above doorways, little silver crescents, polished stones, tiny bronze hands. Whispers of faith in a world where even the old gods are fading. For the Romans, these charms are not just trinkets, they are promises. Promises that no matter how dark the world may become, no matter how silent the gods may be, there is always a light, a whisper of hope, a tiny shield against the shadows. And as the mist begins to clear, the warm sunlight touching your face, you feel it a quiet, gentle peace. A sense that even in a world of change, even in a world where the old gods are fading, there is always a light, a whisper of faith. Because in ancient Rome, a charm is never just a charm. It is a promise that hope can always be carried even in the smallest silver crescent, even in the tiniest whispered prayer. The mist clings to the quiet streets of Rome, soft and cool, like a gentle whisper that wraps around the city. But even as the temples grow silent, even as the statues of the old gods stand quiet, and still the tiny charms of the Romans remain. A young mother ties a silver crescent around her child's neck, her voice a soft whispered prayer. A weary soldier clutches a tiny silver eagle, a promise of strength. An old woman lights a candle beside a tiny silver star, her voice a quiet murmur of hope. For in this world of shadows and whispers, the Romans have always believed in magic, not the fierce thunder of the gods, but the quiet, gentle magic of a whispered blessing, a tiny charm pressed against the heart, a promise carried in silver and stone. And even as the world changes, even as new faiths rise and old temples crumble, that quiet magic remains a light in the darkness, a whisper of faith. So now close your eyes. Let the warmth of the soft golden light wash over you. Feel the quiet peace of a world where even the smallest charm can be a shield, where even the quietest whisper can be a promise. Sleep well, traveler. Let the light of tiny charms guide you. Let their whispers bring you peace. Sweet dreams. End of script. Sweet dreams.